What happens when a routine security check becomes the most talked about royal incident in decades? On a cold November evening, a King's Guard officer raised his hand to stop a royal vehicle, expecting nothing more than a standard protocol check. What he discovered inside would send shockwaves through Buckingham Palace and beyond. A young princess, tears streaming down her face, sat alone in the back seat of a car that was supposed to be carrying the Queen Consort. This was not a drill. This was not a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of a story that would expose hidden tensions within the royal family that had been carefully concealed from the public eye for years. The question everyone would soon be asking was simple: how did Princess Charlotte end up alone, crying, in Camilla's official vehicle? And, more importantly, what had happened in the hours before that moment that brought her to such a state of distress? The morning of November 15th began like any other day at Kensington Palace. The sun rose slowly over London, casting a pale golden light across the carefully maintained gardens that surrounded the residence of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Inside the palace, the household staff moved quietly through the corridors, preparing for another day of royal duties and family routines. Princess Charlotte woke up at exactly 7 o'clock, as she always did on school days. The 9-year-old princess had developed a strong sense of routine, something her parents had encouraged from an early age. She understood, even at her young age, that life as a member of the royal family required discipline, punctuality, and an ability to adapt to changing circumstances. These were lessons she had learned not from textbooks, but from watching her parents navigate the complex world of royal duties while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for their children. Her bedroom at Kensington Palace was a mixture of royal elegance and childhood wonder. The walls were painted in soft shades of lavender, her favorite color, and shelves lined with books about horses, ballet, and adventure stories stood against one wall. Photographs of her family sat on her bedside table, including one particularly special image from her great-grandmother's funeral, where she had stood solemnly beside her mother, understanding even then the weight of the moment. Charlotte dressed herself that morning, selecting her school uniform with the same care she approached everything in her life. Her mother, Catherine, had always encouraged independence in her children, believing that even royal children needed to learn practical skills that would serve them throughout their lives. Charlotte had taken this lesson to heart, and, at 9 years old, she was already remarkably self-sufficient in many ways. Downstairs, the family breakfast was already underway when Charlotte arrived. Her father, Prince William, sat at the head of the table, scanning through briefing papers while simultaneously engaging with his children. Prince George, the eldest at 11, was discussing something about his history homework with their father. Prince Louis, the youngest at 6, was creating a mess with his breakfast cereal, something that would have caused consternation in a more formal setting but was accepted with good humor in the privacy of the family kitchen. Catherine entered the room just as Charlotte took her seat. The Princess of Wales looked, as always, perfectly composed, though those who knew her well could detect the slight shadows under her eyes that suggested she had not slept well. The past year had been challenging for the family, with Catherine's health issues requiring careful management alongside her royal duties. She had emerged from her health struggles with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper appreciation for the simple moments of family life that she refused to take for granted. "Good morning, sweetheart," Catherine said, placing a gentle kiss on Charlotte's head as she passed. "Did you sleep well?" Charlotte nodded, reaching for the toast rack. "Yes, Mummy. I had a dream about horses again." William looked up from his papers, a smile crossing his face. "You and your horse dreams. Perhaps we should plan another visit to the stables this weekend." The family conversation continued in this warm, casual manner for the next 20 minutes. To an outside observer, it might have seemed like any ordinary family breakfast, albeit one taking place in a palace. The children squabbled mildly over who got the last of the orange juice. William and Catherine exchanged knowing glances over the tops of their children's heads. It was a scene of domestic normalcy that the couple had worked hard to create and protect, understanding that their children's emotional well-being depended on having spaces where they could simply be children, free from the weight of their royal identities. But this particular morning held a complication that would set the day's events in motion. Catherine had a long scheduled appointment that morning, a private engagement that could not be rescheduled. William had meetings at the palace that would occupy him until late afternoon. The children's normal school run would need to be handled differently today, and arrangements had been made for a royal household staff member to transport the children. However, just as breakfast was concluding, Catherine's phone rang. She excused herself from the table, stepping into the adjacent room to take the call. When she returned several minutes later, her expression had changed. There was a tension in her shoulders that had not been there before, and she seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "There has been a small change of plans," she announced to the table. "Your grandmother," she said, referring to Camilla, the queen consort, "has offered to have Charlotte join her for the morning. She is going to a garden event that she thought Charlotte might enjoy before school." Charlotte looked up with surprise. The relationship between the Wales children and their step-grandmother was cordial but not particularly close. Camilla had always been a somewhat distant figure in their lives, present at family gatherings and official events, but not someone who regularly sought out one-on-one time with the children. This sudden invitation was unexpected. William's reaction was subtle but noticeable to those who knew him well. His jaw tightened slightly, and he set down his coffee cup with perhaps more force than necessary. "Did she clear this through the office?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Catherine nodded, though something in her expression suggested she was not entirely comfortable with the arrangement. She called directly. She was quite insistent that it would be a lovely opportunity for Charlotte to see the gardens before they close for the winter. The decision was made in that moment, though it would be analyzed and questioned many times in the days that followed. Charlotte would accompany Camilla to the garden event, joining her step-grandmother's schedule for the morning before being delivered to school in time for her afternoon classes. It seemed like a simple enough arrangement, the kind of family coordination that happened regularly in households across the country. Charlotte herself had mixed feelings about the plan. She was curious about the garden event, as she had inherited her grandmother Diana's love of nature and beautiful growing things. But she also felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect of spending several hours alone with Camilla, a woman she respected but did not truly know well. Their conversations at family events tended to be brief and formal, guided by the protocols that governed even intimate family gatherings within the royal household. William walked Charlotte to the front entrance of Kensington Palace, where a black Range Rover with royal plates was waiting. Camilla's personal assistant had already arrived to collect Charlotte, a middle-aged woman named Margaret who had worked for the Queen Consort for over a decade. Margaret was efficient and pleasant, greeting Charlotte with a warm smile and assurances that they would have a lovely morning. "Call me if you need anything," William said, kneeling down to Charlotte's eye level. He placed his hands on her shoulders, looking directly into her eyes with an intensity that went beyond a simple school day goodbye. "Remember, you can always call me or Mummy. For any reason at all." Charlotte nodded solemnly. "I know, Daddy. I will be fine." She climbed into the back seat of the Range Rover, settling into the leather upholstery that smelled faintly of Camilla's signature perfume. Margaret took her place in the front passenger seat, and the driver, a man Charlotte did not recognize, pulled smoothly away from the palace. As the vehicle made its way through the gates of Kensington Palace and into the morning London traffic, Charlotte watched her home disappear through the rear window. She did not know it then, but she would not return to that comfortable, familiar place until much later than anyone had planned. The events of the day were already beginning to unfold in ways that no one could have anticipated. The drive to Clarence House, where Camilla resided when in London, took approximately 20 minutes. Charlotte spent the time looking out the window at the city passing by, a city she knew both intimately and hardly at all. She had driven through these streets hundreds of times, but always from behind the tinted windows of a royal vehicle, always separated from the ordinary life happening on the pavements and in the shops that lined the route. She thought about her mother's expression when announcing the change of plans, the way her parents had exchanged looks across the breakfast table that seemed to communicate something she could not quite understand. At 9 years old, Charlotte was perceptive beyond her years, a trait that both helped and complicated her life as a royal child. She noticed things that adults thought were hidden from children, picked up on tensions and undercurrents that swirled beneath the surface of polite conversation. The relationship between her parents and Camilla had always been complicated. Charlotte knew this without anyone ever explaining it directly. She had overheard enough whispered conversations, seen enough stiffness at family gatherings, to understand that there were feelings and histories at play that predated her own existence. Her grandmother Diana, the woman she had never met but whose presence still seemed to linger in photographs and stories, and the way people's voices changed when they spoke of her, was part of that history. Charlotte had learned early that some subjects were not discussed, some questions were not asked, and some aspects of her family's past were simply accepted without examination. The Range Rover turned into the gates of Clarence's house, and Charlotte straightened in her seat, preparing herself for the encounter ahead. The residence was beautiful in the morning light, its facade glowing warmly against the gray November sky. Staff members in crisp uniforms were already moving about the grounds, preparing for the day's activities. Camilla was waiting in the entrance hall when Charlotte was escorted inside. The queen consort was dressed in a tweed suit appropriate for a garden visit, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup subtle but flawless. She smiled as Charlotte approached, a smile that did not quite reach her eyes but was nonetheless welcoming in its way. "Charlotte, dear, how lovely that you could join me," Camilla said, extending her hands to take Charlotte's in greeting. "I thought you might enjoy seeing the winter gardens. They are particularly beautiful this time of year." "Thank you for inviting me," Charlotte replied, her voice steady and polite, the product of years of training in royal etiquette. She performed a small curtsy, the gesture automatic and precise. Camilla nodded approvingly at the curtsy, then gestured for Charlotte to follow her toward the sitting room where tea had been prepared. "We have a little time before we need to leave for the gardens. I thought we might have a chat first. Get to know each other a bit better." This statement, seemingly innocent, would take on different meanings as the day progressed. At the time, Charlotte simply nodded and followed her step-grandmother into the ornate room, settling herself carefully on the edge of a silk-covered chair as tea was served by silent, efficient staff. The conversation that followed was awkward in the way that conversations between people who share a family connection but not a genuine relationship often are. Camilla asked about school, about Charlotte's interests, about her ballet lessons and her progress with horse riding. Charlotte answered each question politely and thoroughly, her responses practiced and appropriate. She mentioned her love of books, her enjoyment of art class, her excitement about an upcoming school play in which she had a small role. Camilla listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, nodding at appropriate moments and asking follow-up questions that showed she was paying attention. But there was something else happening beneath the surface of the conversation, something Charlotte could feel but not quite identify. It was as if Camilla was waiting for something, building toward a particular topic or question that had not yet emerged. The first hour passed in this manner, tea and small talk and the careful dance of two people trying to find common ground across a gap of generations and circumstances. Charlotte began to relax slightly, thinking perhaps this day would be pleasant after all, a simple outing with a family member who was making an effort to connect. Then, Camilla leaned forward slightly, her expression changing in a subtle but significant way. "Charlotte, dear," she said, her voice lower than before, "there is something I wanted to discuss with you. Something rather important." Charlotte felt her stomach tighten with an instinct she could not explain. "Yes, grandmother?" Camilla paused, seeming to choose her words with great care. "I wanted to talk to you about family. About our family, and what it means to be part of it. You are growing up now, and there are things you should understand. Things about your position and your future." Charlotte remained silent, waiting. She had learned that silence was often the best response when adults were working their way toward a difficult subject. "You are third in line to the throne," Camilla continued. "After your father and your brother. That is a very important position, Charlotte. It comes with responsibilities that you are perhaps only beginning to understand." "I know," Charlotte said quietly. "Daddy and Mummy have explained it to me." "Yes, I am sure they have," Camilla said, and something in her tone suggested that she believed whatever William and Catherine had explained might have been insufficient or incomplete. "But there are perspectives they may not have shared with you. Things they perhaps cannot see clearly because of their own position within the family." Charlotte felt a warning signal in her mind, the same instinct that had told her something was not quite right about this morning's arrangement. She said nothing, waiting for Camilla to continue. Your mother, Camilla said, leaning back in her chair and regarding Charlotte with an expression that was difficult to read, is a wonderful woman. Everyone can see that. She has brought so much to this family. But she does not come from a royal background, and there are certain things that people who marry into this family sometimes struggle to understand. Charlotte's hands, folded in her lap, tightened slightly. She did not like where this conversation was going, though she could not have explained exactly why. I worry sometimes, Camilla continued, about the influence that certain approaches might have on you children. Your mother's family, while lovely people I am sure, do not have the centuries of tradition and understanding that comes with being born into royalty. They cannot fully appreciate the weight of the crown, the sacrifices it requires, the way personal feelings must sometimes be set aside for the greater good of the institution. My mother understands, Charlotte said, her voice small but firm. She works very hard. Camilla smiled, but the smile had an edge to it now. Of course she does, dear. But hard work is not always the same as understanding. There are some things that can only be learned through blood, through generations of living with the responsibility of the crown. Your grandmother Diana, she continued, and Charlotte felt herself flinch at the name, she struggled with these things as well. It was very sad, but she never truly adapted to royal life. She let her personal feelings interfere with her duties, and, in the end, it caused great pain for everyone. Charlotte felt tears beginning to form behind her eyes, though she was not sure exactly why. The mention of her grandmother Diana, spoken in this dismissive way, had triggered something deep inside her. She had been raised with a reverence for Diana, had seen the photographs, had felt the weight of carrying the name Diana Charlotte among her given names. To hear her spoken of as someone who had failed, who had not measured up, was deeply painful in a way she could not articulate. I am telling you this, Camilla continued, seemingly unaware of or indifferent to Charlotte's distress, because I want you to understand that there are different ways to approach your role in this family. Your parents are doing their best, but they are young, and they have perhaps been influenced by modern ideas that do not always serve the monarchy well. I want you to know that there are other perspectives, other ways of thinking about these things. As you grow older, you should consider carefully what kind of princess you want to be. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, during which Camilla elaborated on her views about the royal family, about Catherine's supposed limitations, about the importance of tradition and the dangers of allowing personal feelings to interfere with royal duty. Charlotte sat in silent misery, feeling as though the ground beneath her was shifting in ways she could not control. She thought about her mother, who had spent the past year battling health problems while still trying to be present for her children and fulfill her royal duties. She thought about the way Catherine would tuck her in at night, reading stories and making up silly voices for the characters. She thought about the warmth and love that filled their home at Kensington Palace, the sense of safety and belonging that she had always taken for granted. And now this woman, this step-grandmother who had never shown particular interest in her before, was telling her that all of that was somehow wrong, somehow insufficient, somehow based on a flawed understanding of what it meant to be royal. By the time they left for the garden event, Charlotte felt as though she was walking through a fog. She went through the motions of the visit, looking at the winter blooms, smiling for the photographers who captured images of the queen consort and the young princess enjoying a family outing. But, inside, she was in turmoil, trying to process what she had heard and what it meant. The garden event lasted approximately 2 hours. Charlotte stayed close to Camilla throughout, as was expected, but she spoke little beyond what politeness required. Several people commented on how quiet the young princess seemed, how serious her expression was compared to the lively, spirited girl who had been seen at other public events. Camilla deflected these observations with practiced ease, explaining that Charlotte was simply a thoughtful child who was absorbing the beauty of the gardens. After the event, they returned to Camilla's vehicle for the drive that should have taken Charlotte to school. But, instead of heading toward the school, the driver took a different route. Charlotte noticed immediately, her geographical awareness of London streets having been developed over years of royal travel. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "This is not the way to school." Camilla smiled, a smile that Charlotte now recognized as having very little warmth behind it. "There is one more thing I wanted to show you, dear. Another garden, a private one. Your school has been notified that you will be slightly late. Charlotte wanted to object, wanted to demand to be taken to school, wanted to call her parents. But the training of a lifetime, the ingrained understanding that adults were to be obeyed, that scenes were never to be made, that a princess must maintain composure at all times, kept her silent. She sat back in her seat, her heart pounding, watching as the familiar streets of London gave way to less familiar roads. The private garden turned out to be located at a country estate approximately 40 minutes outside the city. Charlotte had never been there before, and she felt increasingly uncomfortable as the urban landscape disappeared and was replaced by rolling countryside. This was not part of any plan she had been told about. Her parents did not know where she was. The estate itself was beautiful, an old manor house surrounded by extensive grounds. But Charlotte could not appreciate its beauty. She felt trapped, confused, and increasingly frightened. The conversation at Clarence's house had shaken her deeply, and now this unexpected detour was pushing her anxiety to new levels. Camilla led her through the grounds, pointing out various features of the winter garden that she claimed to find particularly interesting. Charlotte followed in silence, her mind racing. She tried to think of ways to contact her parents, but her phone was in her school bag back in the car, and asking for it would seem strange, would break the pretense of normalcy that Camilla seemed determined to maintain. At some point during their walk through the gardens, Camilla turned to Charlotte again, her expression serious. "Charlotte," she said, "I hope you have been thinking about what we discussed this morning. These are important matters. Your future, and the future of the monarchy, may depend on the choices you make as you grow older." Charlotte found her voice at last, small and trembling but present. "I want to go to school now," she said. "Please. My parents will be worried." Camilla studied her for a long moment, something flickering in her eyes that Charlotte could not read. "Very well," she said finally. "We shall return to London." The drive back was silent. Charlotte stared out the window, watching the countryside pass, feeling the distance between herself and home with every mile. She thought about what she would tell her parents, how she would explain what had happened, what Camilla had said. Part of her wanted to tell them everything. Another part felt that perhaps she was overreacting, that adults discussed such things all the time and she was simply too young to understand the context. But, as they entered London and the familiar streets began to appear outside the window, Charlotte felt the tears she had been holding back all day finally begin to escape. They slid silently down her cheeks, and she turned her face toward the window so that Camilla would not see. She did not realize that their route would take them past a security checkpoint manned by the Kingsguard. She did not know that protocol required all vehicles, even royal ones, to be stopped and verified when passing through certain areas. And she could not have anticipated what would happen when a guard, following his training and his duty, approached the vehicle and saw through the tinted window a young princess with tears streaming down her face. The vehicle slowed as they approached the checkpoint. Charlotte could see the guards in their distinctive uniforms, standing at attention, prepared to perform their duties. One of them stepped forward as the driver rolled down his window to present credentials. And then, for reasons that would be debated and analyzed for weeks afterward, the guard leaned down and looked into the back seat of the vehicle. His eyes met Charlotte's, saw her tears, saw the distress written across her young face. What happened next would change everything. The guard's name was Sergeant Thomas Mitchell, and he had served in the Kingsguard for nearly 15 years. In that time, he had seen countless royal vehicles pass through his checkpoint, had verified the credentials of everyone from minor nobility to members of the immediate royal family. He knew the protocols by heart, understood the delicate balance between security and discretion that his position required. He had never once in his career deviated from proper procedure or allowed personal judgment to interfere with his duties. But, when he looked through that tinted window and saw Princess Charlotte, a child he had watched grow up through television coverage and newspaper photographs, sitting alone in the back seat with tears streaming down her face, something in him shifted. This was not right. Every instinct he had developed over years of service told him that something was deeply wrong with this picture. The vehicle's credentials were in order. The driver was known to him, a regular within the royal fleet. The woman in the passenger seat, Margaret, had passed through this checkpoint dozens of times before. By every standard measure, there was no reason to delay the vehicle or make further inquiries. And, yet, Sergeant Mitchell straightened up and stepped back from the driver's window. He signaled to his colleague, a younger guard named Private Williams, to approach. The two men exchanged a brief look, the kind of wordless communication that develops between people who work closely together in high-stakes situations. "One moment please," Sergeant Mitchell said to the driver. Routine verification. He walked around to the rear of the vehicle, his heart beating faster than regulations would have approved of. Through the back window, he could see Charlotte turning away, trying to hide her tears, and Camilla sitting beside her with an expression of barely concealed irritation. The protocols were clear. Royal family members were to be treated with the utmost respect and discretion. Their privacy was paramount. A guard who overstepped his boundaries could face serious consequences, up to and including dismissal from the force. But the protocols also required him to ensure the safety and well-being of all members of the royal family. A crying child, regardless of her title, fell within his duty of care. He tapped gently on the rear window. After a moment, it lowered several inches, and he found himself looking at Camilla's sharp features. "Is there a problem, Sergeant?" Camilla asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was not accustomed to being questioned. "Your Royal Highness," Sergeant Mitchell said, keeping his voice steady and respectful. "I apologize for the inconvenience. I need to verify that all passengers are well before allowing the vehicle to proceed." Camilla's eyes narrowed. "That is highly irregular. Our credentials have been presented and verified. We are on official business." "I understand, ma'am. However, protocol requires that I ensure all passengers are traveling voluntarily and without distress. It will only take a moment." There was a tense silence. Sergeant Mitchell could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure of Camilla's displeasure pressing against his resolve. He held his ground, meeting her gaze without defiance but without submission either. Then, a small voice spoke from beside Camilla. "I want to see my daddy." The words were barely above a whisper, but they carried across the cold November air with perfect clarity. Sergeant Mitchell felt his heart clench. He looked past Camilla to where Charlotte sat, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Princess Charlotte," he said gently, "are you all right?" Camilla intervened before Charlotte could respond. "The child is fine. She is simply tired. It has been a long morning. Now if you will excuse us, we have a schedule to maintain." But Charlotte shook her head, a small but unmistakable gesture. "I want to go home," she said, her voice stronger now. "Please. I want to go home to my mummy and daddy." The situation had escalated beyond what Sergeant Mitchell had anticipated. He was now in uncharted territory, facing a potential conflict between two members of the royal family, with cameras from nearby news agencies potentially capturing every moment. Whatever he did next would have consequences that extended far beyond this checkpoint. He made his decision. "Private Williams," he called out, "please radio for the duty officer. And contact the Prince of Wales's office immediately." The next 10 minutes were among the most tense of Sergeant Mitchell's career. He stood by the vehicle, maintaining his position while Private Williams made the necessary calls. Inside the car, he could see Camilla speaking urgently into her phone, her expression dark with anger. Charlotte had retreated into herself, pulling her knees up to her chest and wrapping her arms around them, making herself as small as possible. The first to arrive was Captain Edward Barnes, the duty officer for that sector of London. Captain Barnes was a veteran of the Guard, a man known for his calm demeanor and sound judgment. He assessed the situation quickly, speaking briefly with Sergeant Mitchell before approaching the vehicle himself. "Your Royal Highness," he said to Camilla through the window, "I apologize for this delay. There appears to have been some confusion regarding Princess Charlotte's schedule. We are attempting to clarify the situation with Kensington Palace." "There is no confusion," Camilla said flatly. "The princess is accompanying me. Her parents were informed. This detention is entirely unnecessary and inappropriate." Captain Barnes nodded diplomatically. "I understand, ma'am. However, we have received a request from Kensington Palace to hold position until a representative can arrive. It should not be long." Camilla's face flushed with poorly concealed anger. This is outrageous. I am the queen consort. I do not require permission to spend time with my own step-granddaughter. Of course not, ma'am. This is simply a matter of confirming schedules and ensuring all parties are in communication. A routine precaution. The wait stretched out, minutes feeling like hours. Charlotte remained curled in her seat, occasionally glancing out the window at the guards who stood at attention around the vehicle. She did not understand exactly what was happening, but she knew that help was coming. Somehow, impossibly, her silent plea had been heard. The first vehicle from Kensington Palace arrived approximately 12 minutes after the initial call. It was a black BMW driven by David Morris, one of Prince William's most trusted security officers. David had been with the family for 8 years, through births and funerals, through crises and celebrations. He knew Charlotte as well as anyone outside her immediate family. He emerged from his vehicle and approached Captain Barnes, their conversation brief and businesslike. Then, David walked to the rear door of Camilla's Range Rover and opened it gently. "Princess Charlotte," he said, his voice warm and steady, "your father sent me. Would you like to come with me?" Charlotte's response was immediate. She unbuckled her seatbelt and launched herself toward David, her small arms wrapping around his neck as he caught her. She was crying again, but these tears were different. These were tears of relief. "This is completely unacceptable," Camilla said, her voice rising. "I demand to know who authorized this intervention. The king will hear of this." David remained focused on Charlotte, carrying her toward his vehicle. He did not respond to Camilla directly, did not engage with her anger. His sole concern was the child in his arms and getting her safely home. "Charlotte," he said quietly as they walked, "you are safe now. Your daddy is waiting for you. Everything is going to be all right." He placed her gently in the back seat of his BMW, buckling her in with practiced care. Then, he climbed into the driver's seat and pulled away from the checkpoint, leaving behind the chaos he knew was already unfolding. The drive to Kensington Palace took 23 minutes. Charlotte spent most of it in silence, watching the familiar streets of London pass outside the window. The tears had stopped, replaced by a strange numbness that settled over her like a blanket. She was going home. She was safe. But something had changed, something fundamental that she could not quite name. David did not press her for details. He understood that whatever had happened, it was beyond his place to investigate. His job was to deliver Charlotte safely to her parents, and that was exactly what he intended to do. As they passed through the gates of Kensington Palace, Charlotte saw her father standing on the front steps. William's face was a mask of barely controlled emotion, his hands clenched at his sides, his entire body radiating tension. Behind him, Catherine stood in the doorway, her hand pressed against her mouth, her eyes fixed on the approaching vehicle. The car had barely stopped before William was pulling open the rear door. Charlotte fell into his arms, burying her face against his chest, feeling his arms wrap around her with fierce protectiveness. She heard him murmuring into her hair, words she could not quite make out but whose meaning was clear. He was there. She was safe. Nothing else mattered in that moment. Catherine joined them within seconds, her hands running over Charlotte's hair and face as if confirming that she was real, that she was unharmed. The three of them stood there in the driveway, a tableau of family reunited, while staff and security watched from a respectful distance. Eventually, William pulled back enough to look at Charlotte's face. He studied her carefully, noting the tear stains, the redness around her eyes, the tremor in her lower lip that suggested she was barely holding herself together. "Let us go inside," he said softly. "We will get you something warm to drink, and then you can tell us what happened. If you want to. Only if you want to." They moved into the palace, William carrying Charlotte as if she were much younger than her 9 years. Catherine walked beside them, one hand resting on Charlotte's back, maintaining physical contact as if afraid to let go. They passed through the entrance hall and into the private family quarters, away from the formal spaces where royal business was conducted. The sitting room they entered was comfortable and familiar, decorated with personal photographs and the accumulated treasures of family life. George and Louis had been taken to a different part of the palace, their afternoon activities supervised by staff who had been instructed to keep them occupied and unaware of the developing situation. William sat on the sofa with Charlotte in his lap. Catherine curled up beside them, close enough to maintain the physical connection that seemed so important in that moment. A staff member appeared briefly, depositing a tray with hot chocolate and biscuits before withdrawing silently. For several minutes, no one spoke. The only sounds were Charlotte's occasional sniffles and the distant ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. The silence was not uncomfortable but, rather a space for recovery, a pause between the storm that had passed and the conversation that needed to happen. It was Charlotte who finally broke the silence. "She told me things," she said, her voice small. "About Mummy. About Grandma Diana. She said they did not understand. She said they were not really royal." Catherine's sharp intake of breath was audible. William's arms tightened around his daughter, but his voice remained calm. "What else did she say, sweetheart?" And so Charlotte began to talk. The words came slowly at first, then faster as the dam broke and everything that had been building inside her throughout the terrible day came pouring out. She told them about the conversation at Clarence's house, about Camilla's assertions regarding Catherine's limitations, about the comparison to Diana and the suggestion that both women had failed to properly adapt to royal life. She told them about the unexpected detour to the country estate, about feeling trapped and scared, about wanting desperately to call home but not knowing how. She told them how Camilla had encouraged her to think differently about her role, to consider perspectives that her parents might not share. She told them about the subtle but unmistakable implication that loyalty to Camilla and the king might sometimes need to take precedence over loyalty to her own mother and father. By the time she finished, Catherine was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she listened to her daughter recount what amounted to psychological manipulation by a woman she had tried for years to accept as family. William's jaw was set like stone, his eyes burning with an anger that he was barely containing for his daughter's sake. "Charlotte," William said when she had finished, "I want you to know that none of what she said is true. Your mother is the most incredible woman I have ever known. She has given everything to this family, to you children, to the work we do. She belongs here. She has always belonged here." Catherine reached out and took Charlotte's hand. "And your Grandma Diana," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "was brave and wonderful and loved so much. She changed this family for the better, and we carry her memory with honor. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Charlotte nodded, but the uncertainty in her eyes was visible. The poison that had been planted that morning would take time to fully remove, if it could ever be completely eliminated. Seeds of doubt, once sown, had a way of taking root in even the most well-tended gardens. "What happens now?" Charlotte asked. "Will I have to see her again? Will she be angry?" William exchanged a look with Catherine over Charlotte's head. The question was loaded with implications that extended far beyond a simple family disagreement. What had happened today was serious enough to potentially affect the entire structure of the royal family, to create rifts that might never fully heal. "You will not be alone with her again," William said firmly. "I promise you that. And what happens next, well, that is something your mother and I need to figure out. But the most important thing, the only thing that truly matters right now, is that you are safe and you are home and we love you more than anything in the world." Charlotte leaned into her father's chest, exhausted by the day's events but, finally, feeling the tension begin to release from her small body. She was home. She was with her parents. For now, that would have to be enough. But the story was far from over. While Charlotte rested in the safety of her parents' arms, news of the checkpoint incident was already spreading through the palace network. The king had been informed. Palace officials were scrambling to understand what had happened and how to manage the fallout. Media inquiries were beginning to arrive, journalists having picked up on unusual activity at the royal checkpoint. The comfortable bubble of the family sitting room at Kensington Palace was about to be penetrated by forces much larger than any of them could control. Several miles away, in his study at Buckingham Palace, King Charles III received the news from his private secretary with an expression of profound weariness. The details were still emerging, but the broad strokes were clear enough. His wife had taken his granddaughter on an unauthorized outing that had ended with the child in tears and a security intervention that would be nearly impossible to keep from the press. The king sat in silence for a long moment after his secretary finished speaking. He had known that the integration of his current family with the legacy of his first marriage would always be complicated. He had hoped, perhaps naively, that time and patience would smooth the rough edges, that Camilla and William could eventually find a way to coexist peacefully within the structure of the monarchy. Today's events suggested that hope had been misplaced. "Get me William on the phone," the king said finally. "And have my car prepared. I need to go to Kensington Palace." The secretary hesitated. "Sir, with respect, perhaps some time would be advisable before any direct conversation. Emotions are running high, and there may be details that are not yet clear." Charles shook his head. "No. I need to see my granddaughter. I need to hear from my son what happened today. And I need to understand what my wife was thinking." The phone call to William was brief and tense. The Prince of Wales was not in a mood to engage in extended conversation with his father. He confirmed that Charlotte was home and safe, provided a minimal summary of what she had reported, and made it clear that a face-to-face meeting would be necessary to discuss next steps. His tone was controlled but carried an undercurrent of anger that even the formal language of royal communication could not fully disguise. Charles arrived at Kensington Palace approximately an hour after Charlotte's return. He was met at the door by William alone, Catherine having chosen to remain with Charlotte in the family quarters. The two men stood for a moment in the entrance hall, father and son, king and heir, their relationship suddenly more complicated than it had been when the sun rose that morning. "Thank you for coming," William said, the courtesy automatic despite the tension between them. "Charlotte is resting. Kate is with her. She had a very difficult day." Charles nodded. "I understand. William, I want you to know that I had no knowledge of Camilla's plans. This was not arranged or approved through any official channels that I am aware of." "And yet it happened," William said flatly. "Your wife took my daughter, told her that her mother is not truly royal, compared her to my mother in the most disparaging way imaginable, and then took her to a location we had no knowledge of. These are not the actions of someone who accidentally overstepped." Charles sighed, the weight of his position and his personal responsibilities pressing down on him visibly. "I will speak with Camilla. I will get her account of what happened. With respect, father, I do not particularly care what her account is. I care about what my 9-year-old daughter experienced today. I care about the tears she cried. I care about the fear in her voice when she told us she wanted to come home and did not know how to reach us." The silence between them stretched out, heavy with implications neither man was ready to fully articulate. This was not simply a family dispute. This was a conflict that touched on the very structure of the modern monarchy, on the relationships that held together an institution that billions of people around the world still look to as a symbol of continuity and stability. Charles was the first to speak again. "What do you want me to do, William? What would make this right?" William considered the question carefully before answering. He knew that whatever he said next would have consequences that extended far beyond this moment, this room, this day. "I want you to understand that my family comes first," he said finally. "Before the monarchy. Before tradition. Before any consideration of what is best for the institution. Kate and our children are my priority. They have always been my priority, and today's events have only reinforced that commitment. I am not asking you to choose between your wife and your grandchildren," William continued. "But I am telling you that I will protect them from anyone who seeks to harm them, regardless of their title or their position within this family. If Camilla cannot accept Kate as a true and valued member of this family, if she cannot treat my children with the love and respect they deserve, then her access to them will be severely limited." Charles absorbed these words in silence. He could see the determination in William's eyes, the same stubborn resolve that Diana had possessed, the same willingness to buck convention in defense of those he loved. For a moment, he saw his first wife's ghost standing behind his son, her influence evident in every line of William's posture. "I will speak with Camilla," Charles repeated. And I will make clear that behavior of this kind is unacceptable. But, William, I hope you understand that the situation is complex. The history between all of us, the wounds that have never fully healed, they do not excuse what happened today, but perhaps they explain it. William's expression did not soften. Charlotte is 9 years old. She did not create this family's history. She should not be made to bear its burdens. Whatever issues exist between the adults in this family, they should never have touched her. The conversation continued for another hour, circling around the same themes of protection, responsibility, and the complicated dynamics that defined their family. By the time Charles left Kensington Palace, nothing had been fully resolved, but the lines had been drawn. William had made his position clear. The ball was now in the King's court. Back at Buckingham Palace, Camilla was waiting. She had returned from the checkpoint incident in a fury, her anger at being stopped and questioned burning bright enough to temporarily overshadow any concern about the consequences of her actions. In her view, she had done nothing wrong. She had simply tried to connect with her step-granddaughter, to share some wisdom about the realities of royal life. If the child had found the conversation upsetting, that was regrettable but not her fault. Children needed to learn these truths eventually. The conversation between Charles and Camilla that evening would remain private, its details known only to the two participants. But the raised voices that staff members reported hearing through closed doors suggested it was not a pleasant exchange. Whatever was said, whatever explanations were offered or excuses given, the result was a new tension in the King's marriage that would be evident to those who saw them together in the days that followed. As night fell over London, the various members of the royal family retreated to their respective residences, each processing the day's events through their own lens of experience and emotion. At Kensington Palace, Charlotte finally fell asleep, surrounded by the familiar comfort of her own bedroom, her parents having taken turns sitting with her until she drifted off. At Buckingham Palace, the King sat alone in his study, contemplating the impossible task of holding his family together while the fault lines that ran through its foundation threatened to split it apart. And, at Clarence House, Camilla sat before her vanity mirror, removing her makeup with methodical precision, her reflection staring back at her with an expression that gave nothing away. Whatever she was thinking, whatever she was planning, she kept it to herself. The public knew nothing of these events yet. The checkpoint incident had been noted by a few photographers, but, without context, the images were merely curiosity pieces. A royal vehicle stopped for verification. Guards speaking with occupants. Nothing that seemed particularly newsworthy on its face. But secrets in the royal family had a way of emerging into the light. The truth of what had happened on that November day was about to become much harder to contain. The morning newspapers the next day carried no mention of the incident. The palace communications team had worked through the night to ensure that the few journalists who had noticed unusual activity at the checkpoint were satisfied with the official explanation of a routine security exercise. For 24 hours, it seemed as though the events of November 15 might remain a private family matter, known only to those directly involved. But royal households are not sealed environments. They employ hundreds of staff members, each with their own networks of family and friends. Information flows through these channels like water through cracks in a dam, finding its way to the outside world through pathways that no amount of official secrecy can completely block. The first leak came from an unexpected source. A young woman who worked as an assistant in the King's Guard Records Office had a cousin who worked as a junior reporter for a tabloid newspaper. The cousin had been assigned to cover royal news and was always looking for stories that might help establish her reputation. When her relative mentioned in casual conversation that something unusual had happened at a royal checkpoint, that a young princess had been found crying in a vehicle that was supposed to be carrying the queen consort, the reporter recognized immediately that she had stumbled onto something significant. The story appeared on the tabloid's website 3 days after the incident, buried initially among lesser royal news but carrying enough detail to suggest insider knowledge. The headline was provocative: Royal Mystery at Checkpoint, Princess Charlotte Found in Tears. The article was carefully worded, presenting the known facts without explicit accusation but leaving plenty of room for readers to draw their own conclusions. Within hours, the story had spread across social media platforms. The public's appetite for royal drama, particularly drama involving the children of the Prince and Princess of Wales, was seemingly endless. Speculation ran wild. What had caused the young princess's distress? Why was she in Camilla's vehicle in the first place? What had the queen consort done, or failed to do, that led to this situation? The palace communications team went into crisis mode. Official statements were issued denying any impropriety and characterizing the incident as a misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion by irresponsible media. But the denials only fueled further interest. The palace's history of attempting to suppress negative stories about the royal family made many observers skeptical of any official narrative. At Kensington Palace, William and Catherine watched the developing story with growing concern. They had hoped, perhaps unrealistically, that the incident could be handled privately, that whatever consequences needed to be addressed could be dealt with within the family without public involvement. That hope was now clearly impossible. "We need to get ahead of this," Catherine said, sitting beside William in their private study as they scrolled through the latest news coverage on a tablet. "If we do not control the narrative, others will control it for us." William nodded grimly. "But what do we say? The truth is damaging enough without embellishment. If we confirm what actually happened, it becomes a major scandal. If we continue denying, we look like we are covering something up." Catherine was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We do not confirm details," she said finally. "We acknowledge that there was an incident, that Charlotte was upset, and that the family is working through it privately. We ask for respect for our daughter's privacy and for the privacy of all the children." "And Camilla? What do we say about her role in this?" "Nothing directly. We let people draw their own conclusions. The facts are already out there, at least partially. If we start pointing fingers publicly, it escalates into open warfare. Our priority has to be Charlotte, not revenge." William struggled with this advice, his protective instincts warring with his understanding of royal protocol. Every part of him wanted to denounce Camilla publicly, to make clear that what she had done was unforgivable. But Catherine was right. Their daughter's well-being had to come first, and dragging her experience into an even larger public spotlight would only cause more harm. The statement that was eventually issued from Kensington Palace was brief and carefully worded. It acknowledged that Princess Charlotte had experienced a difficult day during a family outing, that she was now safe and recovering at home, and that the family asked for privacy while they dealt with what was described as a personal matter. The statement made no mention of Camilla, the checkpoint incident, or any specifics of what had occurred. Predictably, the statement satisfied no one. The media continued to dig for details. Sources within the palace, some real and some imagined, were quoted extensively in the days that followed. A picture began to emerge in the public consciousness, albeit one composed as much of speculation as fact. The narrative that took hold was roughly this: Camilla had taken Charlotte on an outing without proper authorization and had said or done something that deeply upset the child. Security forces had intervened when Charlotte was found in distress. The Prince and Princess of Wales were furious, and relations between them and the Queen consort had collapsed entirely. This narrative was close enough to the truth to be impossible to fully refute, but different enough in its details to create its own problems. Some of the speculation was wildly inaccurate. Theories circulated online about physical mistreatment, about Charlotte being kidnapped, about elaborate schemes involving various members of the royal family. The truth, that Camilla had engaged in sustained emotional manipulation of a 9-year-old child, was in some ways less dramatic than the rumors but, in other ways more disturbing. Charlotte herself was shielded from most of this coverage. Her parents had removed all media devices from her reach and instructed staff to ensure she was not exposed to news reports or social media discussions. She returned to school after a few days at home, escorted by extra security and with teachers briefed to monitor her closely for signs of distress. At school, Charlotte discovered that her classmates had heard something about what happened, though their understanding was vague and incomplete. Some of the other children asked her questions that she did not know how to answer. Others avoided her entirely, sensing that whatever had occurred was too serious for casual playground discussion. Charlotte found herself feeling isolated, marked by an experience that set her apart from her peers in ways she could not fully articulate. Her teacher, a woman named Mrs. Patterson who had taught at the school for 15 years and had seen children of famous families navigate difficult moments before, took Charlotte aside during a break. "You do not have to talk about anything you do not want to," Mrs. Patterson told her. "But I want you to know that I am here if you ever need someone to listen. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone who is not in your family." Charlotte nodded, her eyes welling with tears that she quickly blinked away. "Thank you. I am okay. I just want everything to go back to normal." Mrs. Patterson smiled gently. "Normal has a way of finding us again, even when things feel very strange. Give it time." But normal was proving elusive. The media attention showed no signs of diminishing, and the internal dynamics of the royal family were shifting in ways that would have lasting consequences. The first major public event that required the family to appear together was a charity gala scheduled for 10 days after the incident. The event had been on the calendar for months, and canceling it would only fuel further speculation. The decision was made to proceed, with careful choreography designed to minimize direct interaction between the Wales family and Camilla while maintaining the appearance of unity. The gala was held at a grand hotel in central London, a glittering affair attended by celebrities, politicians, and wealthy donors. The royal family arrived in separate vehicles, their entrances timed to allow for photographs without requiring them to interact in front of cameras. William and Catherine walked the red carpet together, smiling and waving to the crowds with practiced ease. Anyone watching might have thought nothing was amiss, so polished was their performance. But those who knew them well could detect the tension in William's shoulders, the extra brightness in Catherine's smile that suggested effort rather than genuine joy. Camilla arrived several minutes later, accompanied by the king. Her expression was composed but guarded, her eyes scanning the crowd as if expecting hostility. Charles kept his hand at her back, a gesture of support that was not lost on observers. Whatever private conversations had occurred between them, the king had apparently chosen to stand by his wife publicly. Inside the gala, the careful choreography continued. Seating arrangements placed the Wales family at one end of the head table and the king and queen consort at the other, with a buffer of various dignitaries between them. Conversations were kept general and superficial, the kind of pleasant small talk that could be sustained indefinitely without touching on anything of substance. But the tension was palpable to anyone paying attention. When William happened to cross paths with Camilla near the bar during a break in the program, their exchange lasted no more than 3 seconds. A stiff nod from William. A slight inclination of the head from Camilla. Then, they moved apart, the distance between them speaking volumes. Catherine found herself cornered by a persistent journalist who had somehow secured an invitation to the event. The woman, a veteran royal correspondent known for her aggressive pursuit of stories, approached with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Your Royal Highness, such a pleasure. I was hoping for a quick word about the recent reports concerning Princess Charlotte. There has been so much speculation. Perhaps you could help clarify what actually occurred." Catherine's smile remained firmly in place. "Thank you for your concern, but, as our statement indicated, this is a private family matter. We ask that our daughter's privacy be respected." Of course, the journalist pressed on, "But surely the public has a right to know if there are issues within the royal family that might affect the monarchy. The relationship between the queen consort and the younger generation seems to be of particular interest." Catherine's smile flickered for just a moment before she recovered. "The royal family, like any family, has its complexities. We work through our challenges privately, as I am sure you would with your own family. Now if you will excuse me, I see someone I need to speak with." She moved away before the journalist could ask another question, but the interaction had been observed by several other guests. Whispered conversations followed Catherine across the room, speculation about what her careful non-answers might actually mean. The gala proceeded through its formal program, with speeches and awards and the usual rituals of charitable events. Charles gave remarks that made no reference to any family difficulties, focusing instead on the good work being done by the charity in question. William and Catherine presented an award together, their synchronization flawless, their body language giving nothing away. To outside observers, the evening might have seemed like a success. The royal family had appeared together, had fulfilled their obligations, had maintained the facade of normalcy that the institution required. But, for those who knew what lay beneath the surface, the event was merely a pause in a larger conflict, a brief armistice in a war that was far from over. The children had been left at home during the gala, Charlotte still recovering from her ordeal, and her brothers kept back as a matter of solidarity. They spent the evening with their nanny and a rotating cast of favorite staff members, watching movies and eating popcorn in a deliberate attempt to create normalcy. But Charlotte was not fully present in these activities. Her mind kept returning to the day at Clarence's house, to the things Camilla had said, to the way those words had made her feel about herself, her mother, and her place in the family. Even in the safety of her own home, surrounded by people who loved her, she could not fully escape the shadow that had been cast over her. "Is grandmother Camilla angry with me?" she asked her nanny at one point, her voice small and uncertain. The nanny, a woman named Elena who had been with the family for 4 years, knelt down to Charlotte's level. "You have done nothing wrong," she said firmly. "Nothing at all. Whatever is happening between the adults is not your fault and is not your responsibility to fix. You are a child, and your only job is to be a child. Do you understand?" Charlotte nodded, but the uncertainty did not leave her eyes. She had been raised to understand duty, to take seriously the responsibilities that came with her position. The idea that she could simply set aside the complexities of her family's dynamics felt foreign to her, even if it was what the adults in her life wanted her to believe. In the weeks that followed, a new equilibrium began to emerge within the royal family. It was not a resolution so much as an adaptation, a set of unspoken agreements about how various parties would interact going forward. Charlotte was never again left alone with Camilla. When family events required both to be present, either William or Catherine remained with their daughter at all times. The arrangement was never formally announced, but it became evident to anyone observing the family's public appearances. Charlotte stayed close to her parents, her hand often in theirs, her position in any photograph carefully managed to place her at a distance from the queen consort. Camilla, for her part, adopted an attitude of studied indifference. She did not attempt to repair the relationship with Charlotte, did not seek out private conversations with William or Catherine, did not offer apologies or explanations. Her public demeanor remained confident and poised, as if the entire incident had been a minor misunderstanding unworthy of serious attention. But her position within the family had fundamentally changed. The easy access she had enjoyed to the younger royals was gone, replaced by formal barriers that even the king's intervention could not remove. She was present but excluded, visible but marginalized in the family dynamics that truly mattered. Charles found himself in an impossible position, torn between loyalty to his wife and the undeniable reality that his son's family had been harmed by her actions. He attempted on several occasions to broker a reconciliation, to create opportunities for communication between Camilla and the Wales household. Each attempt was rebuffed, politely but firmly. "Father, we appreciate your efforts," William said during one such conversation. "But trust, once broken, is not easily restored. Camilla made choices that hurt my daughter. Until she can acknowledge that and demonstrate genuine remorse, we are not in a position to move forward." Charles wanted to argue that Camilla did feel remorse, that she had expressed regret privately for how the situation had unfolded. But he knew that his wife's version of remorse fell short of what William and Catherine required. Camilla was sorry that there had been consequences for her actions. She was not sorry for the actions themselves. That distinction was one that William understood clearly and could not overlook. The media continued to follow the story, though the initial frenzy had given way to a sustained low-level interest that flared up whenever new developments occurred or new sources came forward with information. Several former palace staff members sold their stories to tabloids, providing details that ranged from accurate to wildly fabricated. Each new article generated fresh waves of commentary and speculation. One particularly damaging story emerged from a former assistant who had worked briefly at Clarence's house. The assistant, seeking payment for her revelations, described a pattern of behavior from Camilla that went beyond the single incident with Charlotte. She spoke of dismissive comments about Catherine, of complaints about the Wales family's popularity, of a general attitude of resentment toward Diana's legacy that manifested in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. The article painted a picture of Camilla as a woman consumed by jealousy and insecurity, unable to accept that the public's affection for Diana and her descendants far exceeded any warmth they might feel toward her. Whether this portrait was accurate or exaggerated for effect was impossible to determine, but it reinforced a narrative that was already gaining traction in the court of public opinion. Catherine, reading this article in the privacy of her study, felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of her was vindicated to see the truth, or something close to it, being told. Another part was exhausted by the ongoing drama, wishing for nothing more than for the entire situation to fade from public consciousness. And a third part, the part that always tried to find compassion even in difficult circumstances, felt a flicker of sympathy for Camilla, a woman whose insecurities had led her to make such harmful choices. She shared these feelings with William that evening, as they sat together after the children had gone to bed. "I do not want to hate her," Catherine said. "I spent years trying to build a relationship with her, trying to find common ground. When she first came into the family officially, I made such efforts to welcome her, to show that the past could stay in the past." William reached over and took her hand. "You are a better person than she deserves. You are a better person than most people deserve. But, Kate, what she did to Charlotte, that cannot be forgiven simply because forgiveness is the noble thing to do. I know. And I am not forgiving her. But I am trying to understand her. Because if I just see her as a villain, if I reduce her to the worst thing she has done, then I become smaller too. I do not want this situation to change who I am." William studied his wife with an expression of deep admiration. "You never cease to amaze me. After everything she has done, you are still looking for the humanity in her." Catherine shrugged slightly. "It is how my parents raised me. It is how we are trying to raise our children. People are complicated. They do terrible things sometimes, but they are still people. I can protect Charlotte absolutely and still recognize that Camilla is a human being with her own wounds and fears." The conversation continued late into the night, husband and wife processing together the events that had shaken their family. By the time they finally went to bed, no solutions had been found, but a deeper understanding had emerged between them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as partners, as they always had. Charlotte's recovery was gradual but steady. With the support of her parents, her brothers, and a child psychologist who was brought in to help her process her experience, she began to find her footing again. The nightmares that had plagued her in the first week after the incident grew less frequent. Her appetite returned. Her laughter began to ring through the hallways of Kensington Palace once more. But she had changed. There was a wariness in her eyes now that had not been there before, a tendency to watch adults carefully as if assessing their intentions. She asked more questions about family dynamics, about the history between her parents and their extended relatives. She was growing up faster than her parents had hoped, forced by circumstances to confront complexities that most children her age knew nothing about. One evening, about 6 weeks after the incident, Charlotte approached her mother with a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "Mummy," she said, "am I really part of this family? Like really? Because grandmother Camilla said that you are not really royal, and I am part you, so does that mean I am not really royal either?" Catherine felt her heart break at the question, at the evidence of the seed of doubt that Camilla had planted in her daughter's mind. She knelt down to Charlotte's level, taking both of her hands in her own. "Listen to me very carefully," she said. "You are Princess Charlotte of Wales. You are the daughter of the Prince of Wales and the great-granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II. You carry the blood of 1,000 years of British history in your veins. No one, not even the Queen Consort, can take that away from you." "But what about you?" Charlotte persisted. "Are you really royal?" Catherine took a breath, choosing her words with care. "I was not born royal, that is true. I came from an ordinary family, and there was a time when people questioned whether I belonged in this world. But your father chose me, and his family accepted me, and I have spent nearly 20 years proving that I can serve the monarchy with everything I have. Being royal is not just about blood, Charlotte. It is about commitment, about service, about putting duty before personal preference. By those measures, I am as royal as anyone." Charlotte considered this for a moment. "I think you are the best kind of royal," she said finally. "Because you chose it. You did not just get born into it like Daddy did. You chose to be here, to be with us. That means more." Catherine pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, tears streaming down her face. "When did you get so wise?" she asked. "I do not know," Charlotte replied honestly. "Maybe when I was crying in that car and wishing for home. Maybe I learned some things then." It was a profound statement from a 9-year-old, and it stayed with Catherine long after Charlotte had gone to bed that night. Her daughter had been through an ordeal, but she had emerged with insights that many adults never achieved. Perhaps there was something to be salvaged from this terrible experience after all. The story was far from over, the family dynamics far from settled. But, in that moment, in the quiet of a palace evening with her children safe and her husband beside her, Catherine allowed herself to feel hope. They had survived the crisis. They had protected their daughter. And, whatever came next, they would face it together. Winter settled over London with unusual severity that year. The cold seemed to seep into everything, including the relations between various branches of the royal family. Christmas, always a complicated affair given the mixture of tradition, obligation, and genuine family feeling that characterized royal holidays, approached with an undercurrent of tension that made everyone nervous. The question of how to handle the holiday gatherings became a subject of intense private negotiation. Traditionally, the entire royal family assembled at Sandringham, the King's Norfolk estate, for Christmas celebrations that stretched from December 23 through the New Year. The prospect of William and Catherine spending an extended period under the same roof as Camilla, with Charlotte required to interact with the woman who had caused her such distress, was one that no one relished. Charles, ever the optimist when it came to family reconciliation, initially insisted that normal traditions should continue. "Christmas is for family," he told William during a phone call in early December. "We must present a united front, for the sake of the institution and for the children's sense of normalcy." William's response was measured but firm. "The children's sense of normalcy was shattered by your wife's actions. Charlotte still has nightmares. She asks questions about whether her mother really belongs in this family. Normal is not something we can simply declare and expect everyone to fall in line with." The negotiations continued for weeks, with various compromise proposals floated and rejected. One suggestion had the Wales family arriving at Sandringham after Camilla had departed. Another proposed separate Christmas celebrations entirely, with the king dividing his time between locations. Each option carried its own complications and neither William nor Charles was fully satisfied with any of them. In the end, it was Catherine who proposed the solution that was eventually adopted. She suggested that the Wales family would attend the traditional Christmas Day service at St. Mary Magdalene Church, participate in the walk to and from the church that allowed the public to see the royal family, and then return to a private cottage on the Sandringham estate for their own celebration. They would join the larger family gathering for Christmas dinner, but only for the meal itself, departing afterward to their own space. "It is a compromise," Catherine explained to William. "We show up for the public moments, we fulfill our obligations to the institution, but we protect our family's private time. Charlotte can see that we are not completely cut off from the rest of the family, but she also sees that her comfort and safety come first." William agreed, somewhat reluctantly. He would have preferred to skip Sandringham entirely, to make a statement by absence that would leave no doubt about his feelings. But he understood that Catherine was right about the importance of maintaining at least a facade of participation. The monarchy depended on the appearance of unity, and there were limits to how far one could push against tradition without causing irreparable damage to the institution itself. The king accepted the compromise with relief, grateful that his son had not chosen the nuclear option of complete absence. He assured William that Camilla understood the parameters and would respect the boundaries that had been established. Whether this assurance was based on actual conversations with his wife or simply Charles's hope that everyone would behave appropriately was unclear. The Wales family arrived at Sandringham on Christmas Eve, settling into their assigned cottage with a mixture of tension and determination. Charlotte was particularly anxious, her young face showing the strain of preparing to encounter the woman who had hurt her. Her parents had spoken with her extensively about what to expect, had assured her that she would never be left alone with Camilla, had promised that they would leave immediately if anything made her uncomfortable. "I can do this," Charlotte told herself repeatedly as they unpacked their belongings. "I am brave. I am a princess. I can do this." George and Louis had been briefed on the situation in age-appropriate terms. George, at 11, understood more than his parents might have wished about what had happened between Charlotte and their step-grandmother. He had overheard conversations, had pieced together information from various sources, and had developed a fierce protectiveness toward his sister that was touching to witness. Louis, at 6, knew only that Charlotte had been upset and that the family was being careful about who spent time with her. His innocent questions about whether grandmother Camilla was in trouble sometimes cut through the careful adult explanations in ways that were both painful and clarifying. Christmas morning dawned cold and clear, perfect weather for the traditional walk to church. The royal family emerged from Sandringham House in their finery, arranging themselves for the photographs and public greetings that were as much a part of Christmas tradition as the service itself. Charlotte walked between her parents, one hand in her mother's, the other occasionally reaching for her father's. She was dressed in a blue coat that brought out the color of her eyes, her hair carefully styled beneath a small hat. She looked, to the casual observer, like any well-dressed child at a fancy occasion. Only those who knew to look could see the slight tremor in her smile, the way her eyes darted toward Camilla whenever the queen consort moved in her direction. Camilla had positioned herself near Charles, maintaining a careful distance from the Wales family. She smiled for the cameras, waved to the crowds, exchanged greetings with well-wishers who lined the route. Her performance was flawless, giving no indication of any tension or difficulty. To the outside world, this was simply another royal Christmas, the family united in celebration as they had been for generations. The walk to the church was approximately half a mile, a route the family had traversed countless times. Along the way, they stopped to accept gifts from children in the crowd, to exchange pleasantries with local residents, to pose for photographs that would appear in newspapers around the world. Charlotte performed her role admirably, accepting a bouquet of flowers from a little girl about her own age, thanking her with genuine warmth. For a moment, watching her daughter interact so gracefully with the public, Catherine felt a surge of pride. Whatever damage had been done, Charlotte had not lost her essential nature, her kindness and poise and genuine interest in people. These qualities, inherited from Diana and